Well, if that doesn't wake you up, nothing will. All right, today for Bible, we're going to continue reading chapter 8 in Forbidden Gates. And so if you can go ahead and get your book out. If you need to pause to go get it, that's fine. But we're going to be reading just chapter 8 today. And hopefully you were able to read with me yesterday. If not, you really need to go back and do that video first. And remember, each day, the videos that are assigned to you need to be watched each day. Some of you have sort of kept up with everything, I think, but some of you are just sort of living free and easy, I guess you could say. You're not really doing what you're supposed to do as far as classes each day, and you're supposed to be kind of spreading it out each day. That's why I only give you the videos that day in order to do the work that you're supposed to do. But we'll go ahead and start reading chapter 8, A Test of Wills. The single small lamp still flickered from its niche in the brick wall when Nathan awoke. He squinted and sat up to look around the narrow, sunless room that had been his nighttime shelter for many days. For a moment, he was unable to tell if morning had come. Then along one wall, he saw the sleeping mats of his companions already rolled up for the day. He was the last one out of bed, again, and he scolded himself for it as he jumped up to store his own mat with the others. Hurriedly, he washed his hands and face in the earthen basin beside the door. As the cool water trickled through his fingers, he wondered about time. How many nights had he slept here in the cleared-out stable room of this simple city home? How many times had the followers of Jesus who shared this space with him left for their daily activities before he even climbed off his mat? Laughter and bits of conversation let him know that the house was not as empty this morning as it usually was. Slipping into the plain tunic that had been loaned to him by the owner of the home, he walked up the 2 steps that divided the stable from the larger, slightly brighter living cooking room. "Morning, Nathan," the woman of the house said. Her dress was simpler than any Benna ever wore, but her eyes were just as kind as those of his servant. She handed him a bowl of olives and a string of figs. "For you and Stephen and Dorian," she said lightly. "My husband and all the other believers have already left for the day." Nathan winced at her words. He was not a believer, and she knew that. Her glance caught his silent remark. "I'm sorry, Nathan. It's just hard to remember that you're not a follower. We've come to love you so much, yet you can't bring yourself to be one of us. Perhaps one day you will." "Perhaps," Nathan said, things like this to ease the guilt he felt in accepting her hospitality but not her ways. The followers were so kind to him. In his weaker moments, he wished he too believed that Jesus the carpenter had been raised from the dead. If someone somehow could show him that the resurrection were true, then he would be a follower of Jesus, one of those who called him the Messiah. Carrying breakfast in to his friends, he sat down with them on the floor. Stephen smiled and whispered a blessing over the food, one that Nathan had heard since boyhood. As soon as Stephen finished, Dorian's hand was in the bowl, but he stopped before his fingers touched the food. "I'm sorry, Nathan," he said, drawing his hand to his side. "I forgot. You must eat first because a Jew doesn't share the bowl with Gentiles." Nathan glared at him while he took his portion. Dorian's eyes still danced happily. "I didn't mean that in a bad way," he explained. "I'm just speaking the facts. You know how I feel about you. You're like a brother, even with your rules." Dorian took some olives and passed the bowl to Stephen, but the man shook his head. "What's bothering you, Stephen? I can tell when something's on your mind." Stephen chuckled. "Yeah, this is very true, Dorian, very true." He drew his lips together. "Many of the believers are fasting and praying for Peter and John. Yesterday, the temple leaders arrested them again and put them in prison." Nathan's hands tingled. His father and uncle were a part of this. They were the ones arresting those who had, in the course of his stay here, become his close friends. Stephen put his hands together. "When the Sanhedrin meets today, I think these 2 disciples will be tried. Since I plan to teach about Jesus in the court of the Gentiles, it might be possible for me to get some news on them. Until then, I know it is important for us to fast and pray." Immediately, Dorian dropped his 2 remaining olives into the bowl. "I will fast and pray too," he said with conviction, "and I will go with you to the temple." He looked at Nathan. "Why don't you come too?" Nathan sighed. He had not set foot on the Temple Mount since moving in with the believers. It was too risky to have to face his father or Asher or any of their friends. Stephen stood. "I understand, Nathan," he said. "Besides, there's much work for you here as usual. The vats of grain we have collected from the Greek-speaking widows, or for the Greek-speaking widows, need to be divided into weekly rations. Several sisters in the faith should be here soon to start this work. But I need you to manage the scales and make some records since no one else will be here who can write or work with figures." Nathan nodded with half a smile. This had become the pattern of his life. While Stephen, the original disciples of Jesus, and many newly converted believers spent their days on the streets proclaiming their good news of the Christ, Nathan worked in this house, measuring out supplies and doing the work of a scribe for those followers who could neither read nor write. Dorian joined Stephen at the steps going down into the stable room which separated the family's living quarters from the street. We'll try to be back early enough to repair a roof or two in the lower city, in addition to delivering some of that grain, Stephen promised. It tires us just to hear your plans for one day, Dorian teased, pushing his fingers to his temples. Stephen tapped the boy playfully on his head, and the two disappeared into the street. It was lonely being left with the women, Nathan soon decided as he worked in the small outer terrace. He worked an hour or more carrying and weighing out the huge pottery containers filled with grain. 4 women, young and old, sat around him filling up baskets and jars with the rations he divided. They were good at talking among themselves, but he had few words to say. Suddenly he heard Dorian's excited voice. "You've got to come," the boy gasped. "A miracle has freed Peter and John." When the guards came for them, they were already back in the temple courts giving praise to God. Wonder and curiosity overrode Nathan's fear. Instantly he was in the streets with Dorian. Both boys raced up the temple stairway amid the shouts from the crowds. In the middle of the court of the Gentiles, Dorian elbowed his way to the front so he could see what was happening, but Nathan hung back. Already he saw the danger he might be in. Several Levites and priests, including Asher, were combing the crowds to find the Jews who had been the first disciples of Jesus. Nathan hid his face from a Levite who passed by him to pull Andrew and Thomas from the shouting, crying throngs. Peter and John were already in chains again at the center of the courtyard. And when 8 or 9 other men had been rounded up, the temple guards herded them all away. "They're taking them to trial," a woman beside Nathan wailed. A friend caught her by the shoulders. "Hush now," she comforted. "We must be strong and pray for their courage, that their courage will not fail." Nathan only half-heartedly listened to her words. Other thoughts were piercing his mind. He pressed through the crowd, walking towards Asher, though his knees weakened with each step. At once his uncle spied him. Nathan saw his eyes narrow. "So you show yourself again. What brings you here?" "I volunteer to speak for those men," Nathan said, pointing to the disciples who were being led to the council room. He had steadied his voice, but his words still cracked before he finished them. Asher looked round. There were witnesses, Jewish leaders and believers in Jesus, who had heard Nathan's words. Nathan knew the embarrassment he was bringing to his uncle. "Leave," Asher warned. "I make no claim to be a follower, Uncle, but I know these men. I have stayed with some of them. I tell you, they do not deserve to be treated this way." Asher stepped up to Nathan and pressed his finger into his chest. "I know your father warned you not to associate with these followers. Why do you add shame upon shame by continuing to disobey him?" "They took me in and protected me when I had no home," Nathan told him, "and I saw more compassion among these believers in a week than I witnessed among temple leaders in my whole lifetime." "You have a home if you would come to it," Asher retorted. "Even now your father mourns your leaving like a death." Nathan squeezed his eyes shut. He had not planned on hearing such words of pain. Even so, he would not stop now. "I won't think of coming home until one thing is settled for me," he said. "What's that?" His uncle snapped. "I must know what makes the tomb of Jesus empty." Nathan steadied his breathing. "Was his body stolen, as the temple officials tell us, or did the Lord of heaven raise him from the dead? When I have the answer to that, I will know whether to seek my father's forgiveness for what I have done or stay with these believers." Nathan heard the surprised fluttering whispers of the crowd around them. Asher's face was red as wine. "You know the answer to that. I told you myself. Those men stole Jesus' body. You have my word on it." "Your word?" Nathan let out an angry laugh. "The same word you gave to the leaders long ago when you told them I was not in the temple on the day the Gentile boy came through the gates?" From the corner of his eye, Nathan saw that Dorian had joined him. He turned and raised Dorian's hand with his, as the people watched with astonishment. "This is my friend Asher, the boy who came through the Soreg with me." Asher clenched his teeth, but Nathan kept speaking. "Now I will go to the Sanhedrin, Uncle, and I'll tell them everything I know." Asher lunged at Nathan, grabbed his free arm, and whisked him away from Dorian to the temple treasury. His fingernails sank into Nathan's skin. "I can stop your plan," he warned, "and I will. You see, there is no way you can serve as a witness in the temple's trial. You forget, Nathan, the temple still looks upon you as a child. The leaders will not let you present evidence for someone else." Nathan dropped his head. Why had he not remembered this? "Even so," Asher went on with an awful smile, "I will let you see what is left of the trial. I think I know how it will end, and I want you to be there watching. What you see will clear your thinking. Even as years pass, you will never consider testifying against me again." Asher forced Nathan to stand outside the door of the courtroom and listen. Nathan knew the voice of the speaker. It was the high priest Caiaphas, leader of the Sanhedrin. You men were warned not to teach in the name of Jesus, he was shouting, but still you fill Jerusalem with your talk. We must obey God rather than men, the strong voice of Peter interrupted. The God of our fathers raised Jesus from the dead, whom you had killed by hanging him on a tree. God exalted him to his own right hand as Prince and Savior so that Israel could find repentance and forgiveness. We were witnesses to these things, and so is the Spirit of God, who dwells in those who obey him. Nathan heard benches creak and voices rise as Peter's testimony whipped the Sanhedrin into an uproar. Just then Asher pushed Nathan through the open door. Quick, to the back corner of the room, he whispered. I want you to witness this, but I don't want you to be seen. Hurry before Caiaphas quiets this crowd. Asher squeezed Nathan to the wall and stood in front of him. Finally, the waves of shouting ebbed. He could see enough across his uncle's shoulder to know that the white-haired Gamaliel was rising in the group. He stood in the semicircle of leaders who had again taken their seats in the wide white room. Men of Israel, consider carefully what you intend to do with these preachers. The elder spoke in the steady, strong voice that was loved by Jews everywhere. Other leaders, men such as Theudas and Judas the Galilean, came posing as Messiah, and think what history teaches us of them. When they died, their followers scattered into nothingness. In light of this, consider your present case. I advise you, let the followers of Jesus go. Unless their activity is spurred by God himself, they will fail. But if their activity is of God, then know that you will not be able to stop them. In fact, you will actually find yourself fighting against the Eternal One. The room rumbled with mixed responses to Gamaliel's advice. After many had spoken, Caiaphas called out the decision. Each man will be whipped. Each will be warned not to speak the name of Jesus anymore. Again, the seats of the courtroom groaned and scraped as the council adjourned. Many of the 70 officials went out to a small walled plaza near the council room, between the Gentile courtyard and the public streets. Asher kept an iron grip on Nathan's wrist and forced him to the same area. Now stand and watch this, he challenged angrily. Let this be your warning never to be caught disobeying temple rule. 12 strong Hazans, one for each follower, stripped the disciples to their waists. They hooked the bound hands of each man high onto a whipping post. Each disciple stretched silently, his back bare, his feet apart on the pavement, his head bowed unnaturally between his elbows and the wooden pole. Nathan saw them straining to look at one another with quiet eyes. On command, the Hazans stepped up to the short raised platforms behind the men. Each took hold of a four-stranded whip. The captain saw that they were ready. Begin, he shouted. 1, the first lash cracked. 2, another short, hard practice drive went against flesh. 3, with each awful smack, someone in the crowd called out, Speak no more of Jesus! Speak no more of Jesus! Until the disciples' bodies sagged and were covered with red and bloody stripes. Nathan turned away with vomit rising in his stomach. Why is this being done? Don't make them suffer. But Asher grabbed his neck and straightened him. They are troublemakers, he said. You watch every lash. Then you will not find yourself in their position. Nathan squinted in distress. The men were forced to turn so that the whips would catch their arms and chests as well as their backs. Young John's head rolled in agony as the leather straps tore at one shoulder and then the other. Nathan shut his eyes. 39 lashes were laid on each disciple, over 150 purple, weeping welts raised up across each body. Nathan held his head when the horror ended. A temple officer with a knife walked out and cut the disciples loose, one by one. Andrew, James, Peter, John, the rest of them. Each fell free with a gasp of pained relief. They staggered toward one another, wilted and bleeding, but conscious and able to stand. The Lord be praised, the Lord be praised. These words started echoing among them. We have been strong for him, the Lord be praised. A frown knit Asher's eyebrows. You have been here long enough, Nathan, he said. Now I will take you home. But Nathan pulled away. He walked to the disciples. Gently, he put John's bleeding arm across his own neck. I'm going to help my friends, Asher. I watched them suffer as you wanted me to, and you were right. They showed me everything I need to know. He looked at the Jewish crowd. He saw his father watching him, but he turned away. Come on, brother, he said to John. I will help you to the street. He led him to the gate. As soon as they were outside, many followers ran up to help. The heat of the afternoon sun flamed the men's swollen flesh as the procession of believers limped along. John drew in sharp, hard breaths as Nathan supported him on the way. At the direction of some of the women, the injured men were taken into the believers' homes. Nathan's shoulders ached with fatigue when he finally lowered John onto his own mat in the house where he stayed. John's brother, James, and a disciple named Philip were also there. And Stephen was kneeling beside Thomas, pouring a mixture of oil and wine into that disciple's hot red wounds. One of the women who had joined them carried a bowl of medicine to Nathan. He dipped a cloth into it. With shaking hand, he trickled the liquid onto John's shoulder. The man groaned, and Nathan pulled back. But John encouraged him. Go on. It's not so bad as I made it sound. I'm grateful for your help. Nathan wet his cloth once more, touched it to skin, and waited for the young man's wincing to subside. Each time the bowl passed by, Nathan took his turn at washing the wounds. When he moved to the angry stripes lacing John's chest, the disciple questioned him between gasping sighs. I don't even know your name, friend. Have you just recently become a follower? Nathan bit his lip. I'm not a follower, he confessed, but I admire you all greatly. And it's only that, well, I don't know what to believe about the empty tomb. I've been told that you followers stole the body, and I half believed it until I saw you being flogged today. Now I think you would not have endured all this for some dead corpse. Nathan stopped. Forgive me, he breathed. I'm troubling you in your time of need. John took the stained rag into his own hands. His eyes closed and his face formed a smile. It's no trouble to answer about the tomb of Christ. I was there myself. It was empty. With my own eyes I have seen the living Lord. Nathan's heart throbbed in his throat. It's true then, he said. It's true? John's head drifted back until it touched the wall. Thanks be to God, it is true. And the exhausted disciple sank into a deep sleep. Then I believe you, Jesus, Nathan whispered. Pulling the cloth from John's finger, Nathan draped it over the bowl. He went to Stephen, who was sitting on the floor near Thomas. Stephen's eyes were shut, and his blood-splotched hands were clasped against his chest. Nathan sat down at his feet, hardly able to wait. Presently, Stephen flexed his fingers and looked at Nathan. I didn't know you were sitting here, my young friend. He leaned forward and squeezed Nathan's arms. Are you all right? I saw you with John. He had some deep wounds. Nathan nodded. He's sleeping now, Stephen. I want to tell you, I've committed myself to Jesus. Stephen drew Nathan to his chest. Thanks be to God. He squeezed him tightly. Now live for God, Nathan Benjamin, he said with the emotion of a father. Live for God. Nathan had glanced around the room. Where's Dorian? He's gone back to his grandfather, Stephen replied. I was just praying for him. He left the temple after he heard that the disciples would be flogged. What? He's left the faith? Stephen raised his hand. Oh, no, it's nothing like that. When Dorian saw the disciples' courage today, he decided to go home with the hope that he might lead his grandfather to the Christ. Nathan clenched tight fists. Lord, go before him. Your faith grows fast, Stephen said with a smile. If only my own father would believe what I have seen and heard. Stephen studied him with concern. I will pray for you if you decide to go talk with him. You are his son. I'm sure he misses you. Nathan stood. It won't be today, he confessed. I need time to think, time to pray. Stephen rose to put his hands on Nathan's head. May the Lord bless you and keep you. He spoke in their beautiful Hebrew tongue. Nathan smiled. I'm going outside for some air. He walked out into the city and wandered through the streets until the first gray shades of night filled Jerusalem. Well, that's the chapter for today. And as far as your assignment for Thursday, which is the reading for this is for Thursday, you are to be doing work text pages 182 and 183 and work text page 312, which is the back side of that page that you had. Now, today is Thursday. Tomorrow is Friday, and we will have the memory verse quiz tomorrow, so don't forget about that. You'll be taking that on your own after you studied for it. And then secondly, we will have Bible tomorrow still because, as I explained in the earlier video, that without chapel, we have one each day. So we'll keep doing that, and then we'll have, this will be part one of the fourth section. Part two will be Monday. Tuesday and Wednesday will be the last two sections of part four of the unit that we're doing right now, Unit 7. And then next week in your packet, you'll get a pretest for the Bible test, and that pretest will be on Wednesday. I'm sorry, that pretest will be taken Monday or Tuesday. We'll check it on Wednesday or Thursday, and then we will take the test on Friday. We'll take the memory verse quiz next week on Thursday. Now, all of that will be in your syllabus, and hopefully you are enjoying this story. Don't read ahead. Be patient. Use some self-control. Allow yourself to let the story sink in so far. You know where it is in the Bible. You've heard the story. You've seen things. And again, it's a historical fiction, Christian fiction, but also it's not anything that we know for sure happened. But good story. The person that wrote this, which was Denise Williamson. Well, have a good day, and we'll see you tomorrow.